US has joined the war against Iran, and President Donald Trump has announced that the US military carried out attacks on 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Now let's take a look at the latest developments. Iran's armed forces said that they targeted multiple sites in Israel, including Ben Gurion Airport, after US attacks on key nuclear sites. At least 23 people were injured after waves of Iranian missiles targeted Israel. Several buildings were heavily damaged in the Ramat Aviv area in Tel Aviv, with holes torn in the apartment blocks. Now in Haifa, public square in a residential area of Haifa was left strewn with rubble, and surrounding shops and homes have been heavily damaged. 2 waves of missiles were launched at Israel from Iran. Meanwhile, sirens rang across the country, with air defenses activated shortly afterwards, causing loud explosions heard in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Now, President Donald Trump addressed the nation from the White House after the US military struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including the crucial underground uranium enrichment facility at Fordow. Now, Trump said that the objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat. Calling the strikes a complete success, Trump claimed that the sites were totally obliterated.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days.
Well, earlier in a Truth Social post, President Trump has said a full payload of bombs was dropped on Fordow. The announcement came just 2 days after he had apparently opened a 2-week window for diplomacy. Now, Trump said that Natanz and Isfahan nuclear facilities were also targeted. Trump added that all planes are safely on their way back home. Multiple reports claimed that B-2 bombers, which carry the so-called bunker buster bombs, were used in the attack. Now, Trump reportedly told Fox News that US dropped 6 bunker buster bombs in the strikes on Fordow. It also reported that US used 20 Tomahawk missiles on other Iranian nuclear sites. And talking to Reuters, Trump claimed that the strikes were an amazing success. Iranian media reports confirmed that part of the Fordow facility, as well as the Isfahan and Natanz nuclear sites, were attacked. However, the state broadcaster IRIB claimed that the sites, along with their enriched uranium stockpiles, were evacuated beforehand. Top Iranian officials claimed that Fordow did not suffer any major damage due to American strikes. Israel has closed its airspace after the US attack on Iranian facilities. The IDF's Home Front Command has also updated its civilian guidelines, announcing that all schools across the country are being closed. All gatherings have been banned and only essential businesses are allowed to operate. A White House official said that US had given Israel a heads up before conducting the strikes. The official also said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to President Trump after the strikes. And now for more details, joining us live from Wicklow Island on the broadcast is Scott Lucas. He is a professor of international politics at Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast, Professor Lucas.
Thank you.
So after striking Iran, now Trump's warning was very blunt that any Iranian retaliation will be met with overwhelming force. But Iran isn't backing down. It's already struck Israel, and it's important to note here that the scale and sophistication of these attacks are also far beyond anything we've seen from its proxies like Hamas. And now, having said that, Professor Lucas, let's talk about how Iran can respond to this. Iran has options which can range from direct strikes on the US forces to targeting naval assets in the Persian Gulf or even mobilizing its proxies. And if that chain reaction begins, we're no longer talking about limited strikes anymore. Now, according to you, just how far can it spiral?
Well, I think immediately you have seen the Iranian response, which is to continue the missile attacks on Israel. At least 86 people injured this morning in Israel. Most of those are minor injuries, but we have seen the effect of those missiles that have destroyed residential buildings. Now, Iran, I think, can continue to do that, albeit with dwindling missile stocks. The issue for it is, does it attack U.S. personnel? Now, it could, for example, because there are up to 40,000 American personnel in the region, within reach of drones and missiles. It could directly attack, or it could use the militias that it backs in Iraq, as it has in the past, to attack U.S. personnel on bases there. The problem for the Iranians is that the Biden administration had already shown in the past recent years that it would hit back hard against any attacks, that it would use airstrikes on these militias, and indeed Iran's military had ordered the militias to halt the attacks because of this. Now, we know the Trump administration will go even farther than the Biden administration. So I think it's very risky for Iran to go directly after U.S. personnel. I think the option that is there actually comes from Yemen with the Houthis, who are allied with Iran, who have just said in the past hour that they will renew attacks on Red Sea shipping and that they will fire missiles. Again, the problem is that if the Houthis do these attacks, it doesn't just alienate the U.S., it will alienate the international community, including the Gulf states. And right now, Iran needs the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, as their friends. So I think Iran's move here immediately is political. They'll continue attacking Israel, but beyond that, they will appeal to Europe and especially the Gulf states to say, we are the victims here. We are peaceful. Support us and tell the U.S. to stop attacking us. And Iran will also take that to the United Nations. They've already notified the Security Council this morning. They will be making a formal complaint. So I think it's a political rather than a military response that Iran makes towards the United States, at least in the next few days.
Right, Professor Lucas, and you've rightly pointed out that there are lives on the line. Now, with 40,000 US troops in the region, this war isn't just about missiles. It is about American lives on the line and also credibility. Now, there's a real sense in Washington that this conflict is serving Israeli interests more than American ones and is clearly antithetical to Trump's America First agenda. And taxpayers are asking, why are we getting dragged in? Now, having said that, in your view, did Trump offer anything close to a convincing rationale in his address or otherwise for the U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict?
No, I mean, the rationale, it's not convincing on the basis of the facts, because he says, you know, Iran is only weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And that just simply isn't true. The International Atomic Energy Agency has said that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon at this point. But of course, it doesn't have to be true if he can make American people believe that. So I think the issue here for Trump is not public opinion. Americans will tend to rally around their military in the first few days, first few weeks. I think it's a wider concern amongst his so-called base, the Trumpists. We know that there's a deep split, as you mentioned, between those who favor military action and those who oppose any military intervention except maybe against China. We had seen that with some heated exchanges in the past few days. And indeed, Trump's own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who thought that these strikes were not necessary. Here's the big question. I think if this is a one-off, if this is a special U.S. strike on these nuclear facilities to demonstrate American power, then I think Trump will be okay. There won't be this serious split. But if he continues the strikes, and if he expands them beyond the nuclear facilities, then I think that wing of the Trumpists who are very concerned about military intervention, they will get louder. So for how long does Donald Trump do this? For how long does he drop the bombs? That's the key question.
Absolutely, Professor, and we'll have to wait and see what the answer to that is. But meanwhile, some of Trump's political allies, while they have applauded the strikes, even the critics within the conservative fold fear that another endless war is going to fracture his support base. Now, according to you, does this play to Trump's image as a peacemaker, or is he walking into a trap that could split his support base at this time?
Look, there are many people in America who, whatever Donald Trump does, whatever falsehood he tells, however he presents himself, they'll support that. But they are a minority. So you do raise that question, not just about those Trumpists who think, look, we don't want to get embroiled in this war. We certainly don't want U.S. troops on the ground. We're not even sure we want these U.S. planes in the air. But then you have people who voted for Trump last year who are not Trumpists. They voted for him about other issues, about the economy, about immigration. Carrying out a war on Iran does not replace those issues. So can Trump get away with that? Can he, get over the concerns, especially about the economy, just by saying, I'm the tough guy, especially when he says at the same time, I'm the peacemaker? He has a contradiction there. And I don't know how long he can keep that contradiction going.
Right, so and that contradiction has actually come to light in a very interesting turn of events. Now, just a day after recommending Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, Pakistan has now condemned his administration's attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, calling it a violation of international law. Now, how do you read this dramatic shift in terms of global optics?
I think it's a shift which is going to be vital to what we see over the next few days. Not necessarily from Pakistan, who with respect is a bystander here. Have a look at the statements from the Gulf states this morning, because the Gulf states did not just express concern about this attack. Saudi Arabia said, we repeat that we cannot accept this violation of Iran's sovereignty. Oman went further and they condemned the attacks. Now, the Gulf states have been very careful after these Israeli strikes. They've been very careful about coming out firmly against them because they don't want to alienate Donald Trump. But now that Trump has done this I think puts the choice to them. When are they going to stand up to the United States? I think that's very important. And I think it's also important to watch Europe, because there's a split in Europe this morning. Most European countries have expressed concern about what is happening. But Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has supported the strikes against Iran and has said they are necessary to end Iran's nuclear program. So what does that split in Europe do? Does it help Trump continue these attacks, or does Europe put pressure on Washington to step back as well?
Right, Professor Lucas rightly said that. And now some argue that these US strikes have slammed the door on diplomacy. Now, keeping in mind that Iran was still engaged in dialogue with Washington when Iran launched its preemptive strikes. And now many in Tehran actually believe that the ultimate goal is indeed regime collapse, and it's not just a byproduct of the conflict. Now, from your perspective, is there still any realistic path back to diplomacy, or has that window completely shut?
Not at this moment, because the U.S. cannot negotiate with Iran while it is attacking Iran. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And Iran is not going to come to the negotiating table just to surrender. So the path back to the negotiating table has to be for the U.S. to take a step back. No further attacks. Israel will continue to attack, but the U.S. will have to call for a resumption of the talks. Now, how would that happen? I think that only happens if the Gulf states, especially the Gulf states, and also Europe, put pressure on the Trump administration, not on Donald Trump himself. He's too unpredictable. He's too chaotic, but on other officials in the Trump administration, and they tell them, you are getting yourself involved in an endless conflict if you do this. You need to rethink this. You need to be the adults in the room. So I think it's going to have to be Saudi Arabia. It's going to have to be the UAE. It's going to have to be the European states. And indeed, it's going to have to be a country like India that pulls the U.S. back to the negotiating table. That's the only way that we get a halt to what is becoming an open-ended war.
Absolutely. And Professor Lucas, you mentioned that British Prime Minister has backed the United States strikes and they've claimed that it has reduced the nuclear threat. But we know that the next 48 hours are actually going to be really crucial. The UN is warning of catastrophic escalation. We have the Houthis that are promising retaliation, and regional stability is really on the knife's edge right now. What can we expect going forward from this point, given the trajectory that we're on right now?
I can't predict what's going to happen. But that's the point here. The international community relies on stability. It relies on some assurance that war will be avoided to favor dialogue. And you no longer have that. You have not had that, remember, since October of 2023 in the region with Israel's open-ended war in Gaza. But now you do not have it with Israel and Iran. Iran being a much larger party, a much larger country than Gaza. And if you do not have that stability, and when you have an unstable leader in America like Donald Trump, I can't give you any prediction of what helps. I can tell you some basics. Israel will continue to attack Iran, not just military facilities, but some civilian sites. Iran will continue to fire missiles back at Israel. People will die, especially in Iran, because of this. But I cannot tell you how much further this war expands and how many other countries will be drawn into that. I can only watch and wait with you for the next few days.
Rightly said there, Professor Lucas. Of course, unpredictability has become quite the nature of the conflict we're seeing before us, and we'll have to wait and see how the situation develops to get to any conclusions. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you, and thank your viewers.